I'm going to go ahead and record this because we'll do this, we'll call this a supplemental lecture, right? And we'll get to the other lecture later. In fact, I'm actually think what I'll do, maybe I'll just take that down. By the way, I'm really proud of you guys because as I look at the record, I see that 34 people, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here so you can see. Here we go. That 34 people have already done the last assignment, which is really, really, really great. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Here they are, 34, which is really high. And I'll grade those over the weekend, okay? Now, because of today's special event, I'm actually going to go to the website here really fast, and you're probably going to be happy I do this in the sense is I'm going to just disable these. What I think I'll do is I'll just remove these. This is the lecture for today, right? So let's go ahead and cut that out. And we'll just do this as a special supplemental lecture. We'll put it up for those students at home because it's so important. And then we'll just save this this assignment for next week. So we'll do this assignment on Monday because I know you guys got lots to worry about. Okay, so I don't want to give you an extra assignment. Okay, so just made a quick decision there all at once. But so let's just make sure we get this one done, and then on when you guys come back again. Now you're cohort A or B?
B.
B. So we'll see you on Tuesday. And so we'll give you that lecture on Tuesday and we'll give you the study guide then. So work on your other classes if you finish that assignment. But I'm really proud of you guys. 34 on that first assignment, having that many done, that's really great. And I'm really happy that you guys all got in there and got that done. All right, so if there's still a few more that need to finish, let's get after it. But we just have to talk about what happened yesterday because it has worldwide implications. And so we're going to go to the political science lecture here. And as you guys probably know, we had a pivotal election, which was the biggest turnout that we've had in an election in 120 years. And so when the election results were finished or finalized, and we'll get back to this slide here, what we find out is that Joe Biden wins the presidency. He got the most votes, 7 million more votes than Trump. He won 51% to 47% or something like that. And then he also won 306 electoral votes to 232, which is a big win. So he wins this election. It was one of the most secure, accurate elections in history. Some states counted their votes 3 times. We have a paper trail on everything, so there's no possible way to cheat. States run the elections, and the state of Utah, of course, does a brilliant job of running our elections. We just do a great job. We do mainly mail-in ballots. And without going into a lot of the details, the current president has been denying the results of the election even before the election was held. And he's been agitating a lot of his supporters to not believe in our state election officials and our Democrats and Republicans who manage these elections on the local level. People from both political parties observe the elections to make sure there's no cheating or anything like that. And they're very secure events, but he decided to make an issue of it. And it's been interesting because I think we're going to come to the conclusion that this president has some issues that need to be resolved. And those issues, perhaps he's delusional. I'm just going to say it. We've suspected it for a long time, but he doesn't seem to understand reality. And what he did yesterday was one of the most shocking things that any president has ever done in the history of our country. And this is going to make him probably the worst president we've ever had. His presidency is essentially over. They're already calling for him to be removed from office, and I'll explain that in a second. The reason we're doing this in world history, of course, and this is not a political thing. I'm not giving you politics right now. I'm telling you history. I'm telling you what happened yesterday and the implications of that today. This is not, me being anti-Trump or whatever. This is me simply telling you that what the president did yesterday was one of the worst acts of any president in American history. just the facts. And we're going to back that up with our own Senator Mitt Romney and the speech he gave and some other things. And we have now the call for this president either to resign, to be removed from office with the 25th Amendment, or he'll be impeached for the second time. This will be the only president in American history impeached twice by the House of Representatives. So this is a pretty serious moment. And what we're going to do is we're going to jump ahead and we're going to skip a few things, right? But the Constitution of the United States calls for we the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect union. And let me just go ahead and view this so you can see a little better. This is the preamble. In order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, and ensure domestic tranquility. The opposite of domestic tranquility is insurrection, violence. And so we have this president who took an oath of office to ensure domestic tranquility, and yet he agitated a mob of his followers to attack the very heart of our democratic republic. And as we go through and we talk about Rome, and we talk about Caesar, and we talk about all these things in the past, we just had one of those kinds of moments that the Roman Empire often experienced, where a mob, literally, being egged on by the President of the United States, takes over the House and the Senate, the halls of Congress, our most sacred democratic Republican institution. Our congresswomen, our congressmen had to flee for their own safety. 4 people died. It was absolutely horrible. And the president 4 years ago took an oath. And the oath reads this: I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States say that the president should abide by the rule of law. That when the states say, this is our election results, Joe Biden won this state, you won this state, but Joe Biden won more states, that in the Electoral College, the winner of that is president. And Trump lost. But he wasn't about to lose. And he was going to use whatever means necessary to stay in power. And he's done some pretty remarkable things, which we won't have time to talk about today. But I do have time to play this. And I picked this one on purpose. This is the British Broadcasting Corporation, because this is world history. I showed this in political science too, but since this is world history, I thought this clip would be the one I'd want to use with you guys to let you kind of get a view of how the world is looking at this. And they're looking at it in shock and horror that the great American democracy, the city on the hill, its own president is undermining the very democratic principles of the vote, of the election, of the natural change of power from one president to another in a way we've never seen in 234 years, with the exception of the beginning of the Civil War. And oh, by the way, our House of Congress has not been occupied and taken over by anybody since the British did it in the War of 1812. A few years into the war, 1814, in August, they invaded the nation's capital, burned the White House down, burned the Capitol building down, and destroyed our nation's capital. And it was 1814. And the Congress, the congressional building, has not been occupied by a hostile power since, until yesterday. So let's take a look at how the British Broadcasting Corporation in England showed this to their people at home. Let's go ahead and play.
Violent and tumultuous turn in the past few hours, as thousands of supporters of President Trump stormed the US Capitol building, venting their anger at the victory of Joe Biden in the presidential election. They forced the evacuation and lockdown of Congress itself, where lawmakers were all set to approve the election result. Shortly before the clashes, President Trump had addressed his supporters near the White House, telling them that he would never accept defeat. Within the past hour, President-elect Biden called on Mr. Trump to tell his people to go home, and within minutes, that was indeed the message delivered from the White House. We'll be live on Capitol Hill shortly. First, we'll have this report by our North America editor, John Sopel.
The peaceful transfer of power, the cornerstone of American democracy, seemed a highly abstract concept today, as Trump supporters clashed with police as they tried and succeeded to storm the Congress, where America's elected leaders had gathered to certify the election victory of Joe Biden. Earlier, in a rally outside the White House, Donald Trump encouraged his loyal base to fight to overturn the result of this bitterly contested election.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong.
Many of his supporters needing little encouragement.
Now, he spoke for 62 minutes. And he also said, I'll join you, I'll be there with you, which he wasn't. He just went right back like, you know, most cowardly bully to the White House and hid out. But his son spoke and spoke of taking action. His main lawyer said the same thing. And so after about 2 hours of getting this crowd ramped up, these people that showed up, right? These are not normal folks here. This is a faction, a group of people, and in Roman history, we call them factions, that use violence, mobs, to take over, to take charge. We see it over and over again in history throughout many, many, many countries. We've just never seen it here before. Well, civil war is the exception. But this is just shocking. And, you know, they all talk like, oh, well, we're not going to start anything, but they're there to start trouble. And many of them are armed. And you don't get anywhere near the Capitol with any kind of weapon or whatever. You go through security screens, whatever. Instead, these guys just push through the police barricades. The police force there that guards the Capitol was completely overwhelmed. One poor guy tried to stop people coming up a stairwell, and there were like 15, 20 people chasing after him. And it just, it was a nightmare scenario. Watch what happens here. Listen to these guys, and then tell me if this is a normal group of people. These are what we call white supremacists mainly. They believe in white power. They're flying Confederate flags from the Civil War. They're flying flags that you see, Nazi-type flags that have been part of this country for a long time among a certain group of people. But it's a small faction, but this is a really, really interesting story. Here we go.
To join the fight.
We're here to support, you know, if violence happens, like it happens, but we're not going to start it. You know, we're just like here to defend ourselves. Yeah.
Sorry, say that again.
I'm a Mexican immigrant. I support Trump. Freedom is paid for with blood, and tyranny always masquerades itself as safety and security. And that's what we're fighting against right now.
Outside the Capitol, the outer ring of security had been breached. The crowds had taken Donald Trump at his word, and they were taking the fight to the heart of American democracy. They were literally banging on the doors of Congress. And then some Trump supporters managed to get inside. They were armed and wandering the Capitol building. There were tense and violent scenes with police who have never dealt with anything like this. These pictures appear to show a woman protester being shot inside the Capitol building. A stretcher was sent in. She was later given CPR. A protester breached the inner sanctum of the chamber. The vice president had to be removed to safety by his Secret Service detail. And then the joint session was adjourned. Earlier, the Republican Senate leader, for so long a loyal lieutenant of the president, turned on him with this withering assessment.
This election were overturned by mere allegations from the losing side, our democracy would enter a death spiral. We'd never see the whole nation accept an election again. Every 4 years would be a scramble for power at any cost.
And the vice president, who's officiating over this joint session and has shown Donald Trump near slavish loyalty, also said it was not his role to overturn the verdict of the people. My oath to support and defend the Constitution constrains me from claiming unilateral authority to decide which electoral votes should be counted. And he went on, the presidency belongs to the people and to them alone. And the president-elect has gone on television to warn that American democracy is under unprecedented assault. And he made this appeal.
I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege, to storm the Capitol, to smash windows, to occupy offices, the floor of the United States Senate, rummaging through desks, on the Capitol, on the House of Representatives, threatening the safety of duly elected officials. It's not protest, it's insurrection.
The chamber has emptied, democracy put on hold. Outside, they were scaling the ramparts, the mob for the moment in charge, believing they have the right to overthrow the will of the people. Tonight, the shining city on the hill, as America likes to describe itself, feels as though the light of democracy is flickering dangerously. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
And that's an international view, and it's just it's a terrible situation that we find ourselves in. I'm not going to play these other yahoos because they frankly don't deserve our time. Those that aided and abetted this, but these pictures are stunning. I mean, here we have, of course, the Secret Service with their guns drawn to protect the well of the house where the house meets, where people are huddled down for their own safety. This guy right here is an Army veteran of the 82nd Airborne, I believe, and he's Special Forces, and he is protecting some of his fellow members who were just so distraught. They managed to evacuate everybody, and then they restored order. It took about 6 hours. There were pipe bombs that were being planted. Look at these people, you know, can you believe this? This is just beyond belief that this could happen in America. And so again, I'm not going to give credibility to these other people. And political science, of course, we talk a little bit more about this because that is the subject we're in. We're not here to give you a political statement. We're just here to tell you what happened. And this is unthinkable. This is unthinkable in America. And the last time this happened was the British invading in August of 1814 during a war that we had with them. And they burned our Capitol down, and they took over the Capitol building, and they burned the White House. These guys took it over. And they stopped our government, sent our elected officials fleeing, and it took 6 hours to restore order. Then those same elected officials, though, banded together, went back in, counted the electoral votes, declared Joe Biden the winner, and that happened about 2 a.m. this morning. So they weren't about to be intimidated by this mob, and thank goodness that they're there. Now, these are some terms, right, that I'm not going to hold you to right now. I'll wait till another time, but these are terms that come up a lot in ancient world history. Coup d'etat. A coup is an illegal, unconstitutional seizure of power by a political faction, sometimes a military or dictator. This is exactly what Julius Caesar did to the Roman Senate. Napoleon would do the same thing. And this was an attempted coup. And it's a removal of an existing government from power, usually through violent means. This flag is the symbol of the Confederacy that fought against us, the United States, in the Civil War. That flag never got near the nation's capital during that war. And all of a sudden now, we've got these people flying that flag proudly in our nation's capital, walking around. That's the symbol, by the way, of slavery. So this is like unbelievable event. And the crowd may have been 20, 30, even maybe 40,000 people. This guy was one of the ringleaders, I've just learned, by the way. And he broke into the Speaker of the House, she's the most powerful person in the House of Representatives. You're going to hear her in a minute, and just broke into her office and took a bunch of stuff. And this guy right here is sitting where the vice president's supposed to sit when we count the ballots. What you saw here was insurrection, an act or an instance of revolting against an established government. That's what it was, an insurrection, pure and simple, spurred on by the President of the United States in a 62-minute speech. He actually invited them to come to DC on this day. Then he had the rally outside the White House. And then they marched down 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol building and took it over to stop the vote, to stop the will of the people. This is what we call sedition. Sedition is the subversion of a constitution and the incitement of discontent toward and a rebellion against the established government, against our constitution, against our democratic republic, our way of life. They're terrorists. Terrorism has a specific definition in the law. Basically, it's use fear and violence to push your political ideology. And that's what they were doing. Fear and violence to push their ideas. And
you have a question?
Hang on a bit. These radical ideas, right, are conspiracy theories that think they should be ruling the country and not the rule of the people. Okay? All right, go ahead and ask your question.
So, with the BLM right, well, peaceful protests as they're put, would that also considered terrorism since they are trying to push their political ideology by the use of violence?
And you said the difference. I don't think I heard all the question, but I think from what I heard, peaceful protest is great. And had these people just marched down and had their protest outside of the Capitol building, there's an area set aside. That's where the barricades were. And if they'd have stayed behind the barricades, they could have yelled and screamed. They could have used swear words, whatever they wanted to do, and have their peaceful protest. That's okay. It's when they crashed the barricades, went into an area that has been safe and secure since 9/11. Remember we had a terrorist attack? And they broke things. They brought violence. Many of those officers had to be taken to the hospital, some 12 of them. This was a violent action by a group of insurrectionists. It's not peaceful protest. It's not protected under the First Amendment. So great question. I think that was, if I heard it right, that was a great question. I'm glad you asked it.
Is it saying like in Seattle or other areas where BLM has done similar things, it could also be considered terrorism?
I think to some extent, the Portland was an example of that. And so, yeah, whenever you bring violence, you're out of line, and it doesn't matter who you are. Now, what we've seen, what's different about this is the President of the United States inspiring this. And that's what makes this different and worse by quite a bit. Now, luckily, after 6 hours, the FBI goes in and clears everybody out. Make sure the bombs that they picked up were detonated and all that, and cleared it out. 6 hours later, the members of Congress came in, and one of the great senators in history now is our own Senator Mitt Romney. And Mitt Romney spoke to the Senate. And there's about 100 senators, okay, and a few other people in the room. And he gives one of the most stirring speeches I've ever heard. In fact, some of the best speeches I've ever heard explaining how American democracy works and how we are as a people were given last night over that about 7 hours it took to complete the business and declare Joe Biden the winner of the election. So let's go ahead and listen, and we can be very proud of this, by the way. This is somebody I'm proud to say I voted for. This is Mitt Romney, the senator from Utah.
Today was heartbreaking, and I was shaken to the core as I thought about the people I met in China and Russia and Afghanistan and Iraq and other places who yearn for freedom and who look to this building and these shores as a place of hope. And I saw the images being broadcast around the world, and it breaks my heart. I have 25 grandchildren. Many of them were watching TV, thinking about this building, whether their grandpa was okay. I knew I was okay. I must tell you as well, I was proud to serve with these men and women. This is an extraordinary group of people. I'm proud to be a member of the United States Senate and meet with people of integrity as we do here today. Now we gather due to a selfish man's injured pride and the outrage of supporters who he has deliberately misinformed for the past 2 months and stirred to action this very morning. What happened here today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. Those who choose to continue to support his dangerous gambit by objecting to the results of a legitimate democratic election will forever be seen as being complicit in an unprecedented attack against our democracy. Fairly or not, they'll be remembered for their role in this shameful episode in American history. That will be their legacy. I salute Senator Langford and Loeffler and Braun and Daines, and I'm sure others, who in the light of today's outrage have withdrawn their objection. For any who remain insistent on an audit in order to satisfy the many people who believe that the election was stolen, I'd offer this perspective. No congressional audit is ever going to convince these voters, particularly when the president will continue to say that the election was stolen. The best way we can show respect for the voters who are upset is by telling them the truth. That's the burden. That's the duty of leadership. The truth is that President-elect Biden won the election. President Trump lost. I've had that experience myself. It's no fun.
Now, let me back up and we'll go listen to the heart of the speech again. This guy is a modern day Cicero. His speeches over the last 2 years have been 4 years have been epically important. He's the only Republican who's been brave enough to stand up against his president when he's been out of line consistently. And we'll talk a lot more about him when we get to political science, but he truly is an American hero. And I'm proud to say I voted for him. The thing is with Mitt Romney, he nailed it. It won't matter what they do. They will never be convinced because the president, maybe he's in a different world, who knows? Maybe everything's not clicking up there. But he's, no matter what anybody says, no matter what anybody does, no matter the fact that, for example, in Georgia, we counted 3 times, twice in Wisconsin. All the elections were counted, recounted, calibrated, accuracy. This is the most accurate election we had in American history. It's also the most secure. And yet he fired the guy that set this up to make sure it was that way. President Trump did. Because the guy said, yeah, it was an honest and fair election. His own attorney general resigned because he found there was nothing wrong with this election. 60 courts, 90 judges ruled that this was a free and fair election. And every state approved this vote. So it won't matter what we say from here on in. That faction of people will always believe they were wrong. So the best thing we can do is tell them the truth. Your side lost. Deal with it. Let's play this heart of this again. Again, this is a modern day Cicero. Here we go.
That will be their legacy. I salute Senator Langford and Loeffler and Braun and Daines, and I'm sure others, who in the light of today's outrage have withdrawn their objection. For any who remain insistent on an audit in order to satisfy the many people who believe that the election was stolen, I'd offer this perspective. No congressional audit is ever going to convince these voters, particularly when the president will continue to say that the election was stolen. The best way we can show respect for the voters who are upset is by telling them the truth.
Now, Mitt Romney ran for president himself, and he lost against Barack Obama in 2012. So when he says, I know what it feels like, he does know what it feels like. He ran a great campaign, but he just lost to an incumbent president. Barack Obama is very popular. Let's go ahead and play this.
That's the burden. That's the duty of leadership. The truth is that President-elect Biden won the election. President Trump lost. I've had that experience myself. It's no fun. Scores of courts, the president's own attorney general, state election officials, both Republican and Democrat, have reached that unequivocal decision. And in light of today's sad circumstances, I asked my colleague, do we weigh our own political fortunes more heavily than we weigh the strength of our republic, the strength of our democracy, and the cause of freedom? What's the weight of personal acclaim compared to the weight of conscience? Leader McConnell said that the vote today is the most important in his 36 years of public service. Think of that. Authorizing 2 wars, voting on 2 impeachments. He said that not because the vote reveals something about the election, it's because this vote reveals something about us. I urge my colleagues to move forward with completing the electoral count, to refrain from further objections, and to unanimously affirm the legitimacy of the presidential election. Thank you, Mr. President.
Hear, hear. And this was just a great statement. And what's so positive about what happened is that our leaders, then once it was safe, they went back to work and they affirmed our democratic principles and got us right back on track, like nothing had gone on. And that was so important. There's some other clips I'd like to play you that are important, but I'm going to just kind of jump ahead. We're keeping, like I said, this class a little bit lighter in terms of content. But what we should know is the president 4 years ago took an oath written in the Constitution of the United States, Article 2. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. He isn't in respect of the vote. And he incited a mob. You heard it. You should hear the whole 62 minutes. You'd be shocked. So right now, the conversation is this president probably should resign now, even with 2 weeks left in his presidency. His longtime allies, for example, his closest ally in the Senate, his name is Lindsey Graham. He said, I've had enough, I'm done. We have members of his administration resigning right and left. Elaine Chao, for example, just resigned. She's transportation secretary. We had, other high-profile resignations as this Titanic ship is going down. And so here is one of the ways to go. There's only 3 ways out of this for the president, right? Well, maybe 4, but here, let's go through them. Number 1, he can resign like Richard Nixon did. Number 2, the vice president and the members of the cabinet can work with the leaders of Congress and remove the president under a thing called the 25th Amendment to the Constitution. The 25th Amendment, the part that pertains to Mr. Trump right now, is this part. Whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers or the executive departments transmit to the president pro tempore of the Senate, that's basically the leader of the Senate when the vice president's not there, so he's kind of in charge, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, their written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. The vice president shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting president. So 1 is resign. 2 is the vice president meets with the other leaders of the government and remove him from office with the 25th Amendment. And the next one is impeachment. He's already been impeached once. Impeach means the House of Representatives says, look, you did these things wrong. And normally it's a slap on the wrist. It's a warning to the president. We've never had a president removed from office after being impeached. There's been 3 that have been impeached. But under these circumstances, because every single senator was worried about their lives, there was a mob pounding on the door. They broke in. They evacuated them in time. Who knows what would have happened if any of them were still there? Particularly the vice president, because the president had spoken against the vice president. And all the vice president was doing was his job under the Constitution, opening envelopes, counting the electoral votes, and announcing them. That was it. Normally, this whole thing takes 27 minutes. It took us almost 24 hours this time. But now we have the leader of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, who's very important in this whole process, calling for the removal, or she's going to impeach. So let's go ahead and see if I can play this one. Here we go.
The President of the United States incited an armed insurrection against America. The gleeful desecration of the U.S. Capitol, which is the temple of our American democracy, and the violence targeting Congress are horrors that will forever stain our nation's history, instigated by the President of the United States. That's why it's such a stain. In calling for this seditious act, President has committed an unspeakable assault on our nation and our people. I join the Senate Democratic leader in calling on the Vice President to remove this president by immediately invoking the 25th Amendment. If the Vice President and Cabinet do not act, the Congress may be prepared to move forward with impeachment. That is the overwhelming sentiment of my caucus. And the American people, by the way. Justice will be done to those who carried out these acts, which were acts of sedition and acts of cowardice. To those whose purpose was to deter our responsibility, you have failed. You did not divert the Congress from our solemn constitutional purpose to validate the overwhelming election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as President and Vice President of the United States. Despite the desecration of our Capitol, we upheld in front of the country and the world the bedrock principle that the people are sovereign and that they hold the power to choose their leaders through the ballot, rejecting this attempted coup on the part of President Trump and his supporters. Accountability is also needed for Republicans in Congress who promoted the extreme conspiracy theories that provoked the violence, encouraged the mob, and who, after desecration of the Capitol, went back to the House floor and continued to push the falsehoods and underpinned this assault, that underpinned this assault on our democracy.
Now, Joe Biden has since given another speech in which he also condemns the violence. We won't have time for that one today, but he's picked a new attorney general who will take office in about 2 weeks after he's confirmed by the Senate. And now that the Democrats control the Senate, they could actually have the president removed from office in 2 days. So this is one of those things. We've never had a president incite insurrection against another branch of government within our own country. It's just shocking. Now, here's the thing. I don't want you all to be sitting there and be all worried about it because the democratic institutions of the United States held together. We have the Declaration of Independence here. Let me read it to you. Now, what problem with Americans is we always stop right here at the first sentence. We don't go on to the important part that follows. So here we go. We hold these truths to be self-evident. You all know this, right? That all men are created equal. But Trump is not more equal than we are. He can't act like a dictator. He can't do whatever he wants. He can't overturn an election because we're all created equal. We all get a vote. And by over 7 million more votes, we voted Joe Biden in and not him. Endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, this is the sentence that goes often unread. Ready? That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. We established a government with a constitution deriving their just powers from the consent of the government, not at the whim of one person. And this is what plagued, for example, the Roman Empire, is it was always one emperor after another in a military coup taking over that brought the destruction of Rome. We, like the speaker, excuse me, the current leader of the Senate said, if we just, anybody said, well, I don't like the results of that election, we go into a death spiral of democracy. We have to accept the results. Every state determines the results for its state, submits the electoral votes. Biden wins fair and square, 306 to 232. He won by a large percentage and 7 million popular votes. It was clear. So it was also the biggest turnout in 120 years. The American people kind of got a fix on Mr. Trump and realized maybe, maybe this is not the guy we want for another 4 years. And it's very rare that a president who holds the office right now gets thrown out by the American people after 4 years. Usually we give him 8 years. Obama got 8 years, Bush got 8 years, Clinton got 8 years. Those are the last 3 presidents. Thank goodness we elected Biden. Biden, we're going to talk about a guy named Cincinnatus when we get to Roman history. He is the American Cincinnatus. He came out of retirement, shocked by Trump's behavior, managed to win a very unlikely election, and he's going to return us to normalcy. The thing about Joe Biden, you can have confidence and trust that this guy will do everything he can to lead us in the right direction. And he also picked the first woman vice president in American history, and he is filling his government with honest and capable people. Going forward, there are brighter days ahead. You may have just lived through the very worst presidency in American history. We'll let the historians decide that in the next few months, because they'll be taking stock. But my favorite president's George Washington. Why? He was the guy that presided over the Constitutional Convention that set the system of government up in the first place. I know we call Madison the father of the Constitution, but Madison doesn't get anything done unless Washington is presiding over the meeting. In 1787, Washington presided. He was the president of the Constitutional Convention. He was deeply involved in every decision, and he was the only reason that meeting hung together. And when he was elected the first president with the Electoral College, just like we do today, 232 years ago, after he finished his 8 years, he ran 2 terms, he gave an a goodbye speech. And in his goodbye speech, he said, "Be thoughtful in amending the government so it isn't weakened or thwarted by unjust men." Avoid factionalism. What you saw with that mob was a faction, a small group of people who don't care about our country. They don't care about our Constitution. They might yell USA, USA, but that doesn't make them patriots. They literally broke into the halls of government. If they want to have effect change, go vote. Run for office. Do it within the constitutional framework, not violently take over the American Capitol. He warned against the dangers of political parties, using the party system to rile up people against each other. That's why we love Mitt Romney, because he's going to be able to work with the Democrats. He's a Republican. They're going to work together. They're going to compromise. They're not going to agree on every policy, but they're going to find that middle ground and find us a better place. And right now, we've got to get good now at distributing this vaccine. The Trump administration's done a terrible job with that. They promised 20 million in December. I got 3 million. We're so far behind every other country in the world in Europe, that's an advanced country in terms of this virus. We've got to get a handle on that. Biden's people are competent and will get that job done. I promise you that. And he also warned against political retaliation against your political opponents. The president, Trump, called for the arrest of Joe Biden before the election. This election was not so much about Joe Biden. It was about Mr. Trump in his last 4 years. And the American people found him wanting. It's what we call a referendum on the incumbent. I won't spend too much time on that, but we all believed, I did, when we voted this time, that it was the most consequential election in our lifetime. And now it's proven out that, oh my goodness, what if we'd have given this guy another 4 years? What mischief could he cause? And those that helped him, including this Senator, Josh Hawley, who's giving the power symbol to the mob before they took over the Congress. He's a senator of the United States.
The BLM protest symbol too?
It's a symbol often used of power, right? Throughout history. Yeah. And that was an odd moment for him to turn to that crowd and go get him, guys, kind of a thing, like giving him permission. Yeah. Now, this is what happened later in the night. We had the vice president, who is the president of the Senate. That's kind of an odd thing. We'll tell you more about that next 2 years. And the Speaker of the House going through the Electoral College votes, and they kept going until they counted them all and finally got through that after hours and hours and hours. Now, where does this land Trump in history? Well, we do history professors in that go through all the presidents and they rank them on lots of different criteria and they come up with a ranking system. Usually Lincoln, Washington, and Roosevelt end up on the top. The last university that did this, and they did it 2 years ago, and everybody's waiting until this presidency is over, which is 2 weeks before they do another poll of historians, because you want to wait to see what happens, right? But when they did it in 2018, they had Mr. Trump already at 42 out of 44th president. And so he'd be the 45th, right? But this will drop him perhaps even below Andrew Johnson, who was, well, he had issues. He wanted to undo the Civil War after the death of Lincoln. He was vice president for Lincoln. Maybe not a great pick by Lincoln to be vice president, but he was really interesting. We'll talk more about him again in a couple of years. But Buchanan is the president before the Civil War, that the Civil War started under his watch. But I don't think he didn't want it to happen. He just was unable to stop it. And he wasn't encouraging it. He did everything he could to prevent it. So I just have a feeling that when history's done with this current president, that he will drop right to the bottom. So you've lived in historic times. And let's hope this, back and forth with our political parties, this that Washington, wrote about, will stop. And we can start working together to solve the nation's problem. So that's kind of where we're at. And we're just watching the news very closely to see what happens in the next 48 hours. Now, maybe Mr. Trump will be so humbled by all of this that he'll just sit quietly. I don't know if you know this or not, but Twitter canceled his account. Facebook canceled his account. They just, no, this guy's causing insurrection. And so the social media people have stopped him from tweeting and all that. He had a 12-hour pause on his Twitter account. Let's see if he starts it back up again after the 12 hours. Maybe he'll be humble enough that he'll just ride it out for 12 more days. The question is, does he show up to the inaugural speech that Biden's going to give, like most presidents have always done? See, we're used to a peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next. That started in the first election, the transfer from President Washington to Adams, and then from Adams to Jefferson. And Adams and Jefferson were different political parties, and they didn't agree on anything. But Adams just said, okay, I lost. All right, wish you luck, Jefferson. Went home. That was it. So we're used to the peaceful transfer of power. And what we saw yesterday was far from that. But we will get through this, I promise you. And this presidency will just be well, let me put it this way. This will be the example that will be taught for the next 100 years of everything a president can do wrong. He'll replace Nixon as our bad example. Nixon, of course, was about to be impeached, removed from office, and he resigned because of a big scandal called Watergate. And I'll explain all that to you in a couple of years. That's always been our bad example. And Johnson too, Andrew Johnson. Now we've got a new candidate. And that's fascinating. Well, listen, we've got just a few more minutes, so we do have one more clip. And I want to play this historian's view. Okay, 3 minutes? Okay.
3 minutes then.
Well, listen, I think there's time for this historian's view, if we can do it. And let's go ahead and play it. This is an historian who's talking about the place of Trump in history.
There's an obvious callback to what happened to the Capitol building in the War of 1812. But can you believe we witnessed an event today that has us reaching back to the War of 1812?
No, and thank you, my friend, for your kind word. Did you or I ever think that we would be living through a day like this or a night like this? Here we've got, just as you were saying earlier, a terrorist event, just as there was in the middle of the 1812 war, or near the end of the 1812 war, August of 1814, when the British burned the White House and the Capitol, or the attack on Fort Sumter, 1861, or 9/11, which we all remember. But the difference between those things and what we saw today is this, a terrorist attack on the Congress and the Capitol, was initiated by the President of the United States. We have never seen that before. I hope we will never see it again. You saw that speech this morning. Donald Trump spoke to that angry mob that he had summoned to Washington and told them, march up Pennsylvania Avenue, maybe I'll even march with you, he said, up to the Capitol, take back our country, stop the counting of the ballots, the stealing of this election. And the result was this attack that resulted in 4 deaths today, the vandalization of the United States Capitol, some of our most sacred rooms. And then while it was still going on, This person who calls himself a president goes into the rose garden that he and his wife eviscerated last summer and talks into a camera and puts on Twitter a video in which he says to the mob that's there rampaging through the Capitol, "We love you, we think you're special." That's not something that any other president of the United States would ever have done in American history. The presidents that you and I remember, if there's a riot, if there's some kind of a national emergency, they try to restore order as quickly as possible. And the questions remain tonight. How much was Donald Trump involved in the planning for this terrorist attack today? Was this a conspiracy? Why were his cabinet members so quiet? Why hasn't anyone resigned? We have no idea.
Now, I should just say, as we end class, is that a lot of people now have resigned, at least 4 that I know of. And his top supporters in the Senate now have disavowed him. And he's kind of on an island all by himself. And it's a sad, tragic tale. We're going to talk about Greek tragedy. I just wish we'd have done our Greek and Roman units first before this happened, and you'd have more context for today. But still, it's important. Okay. All right. We'll see you guys in a couple of days, but don't worry. The country is secure. All right, take care.